We will now like to start the Innovative City Forum Art and Science, a special session for today. The topic will be on education revolution, a transformation from education to learning. What is the world of learning created by a new media? First of all, I would like to introduce Dr. Joichi Ito of the MIT Media Lab. He will be talking about the objective of the session. Please give him a big round of applause. He is the director of MIT Media Lab.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. So this morning's session, this is about the reform of education. The technology advancement, computer, internet, and new media, the environment is changing, and the technology that can be utilized in education is changing, and the change is becoming more dynamic. So it's not like the old days where we learn in school and work in the office. It's not a typical pattern anymore. We have to learn forever. And in this new media environment, one more phenomena is the AI. What we have to do as human beings, the work we have to do is changing. So it's not just repeating same thing like working in factory. Creativity may be more important going forward. So as worlds change, the education system has not changed much. So we need to think of how education can be reformed. So that is the overall setting. We have three presenters and then a panel discussion. The first speaker is MIT Media Lab Director, Professor Mitchel Resnick. Lifelong kindergarten is what he does. So kindergarten, playing in kindergarten will continue until they grow up. And so that is the research professor is doing. So we will hear from Professor Resnick.
As Joey mentioned, people around the world these days are thinking about the implications of the era of artificial intelligence. And I think it's important for us to ask, how can we help today's children prepare for that future? And sometimes people focus on, well, what new technical skills will they need? But I don't think that's the key issue. So I want to talk today about how is it that we can help children be prepared for a world that will be full with new types of technologies and changing more rapidly than ever before. Let me start with a story. It's a story about a 12-year-old girl who was growing up in California. And she loved to draw. Every day she would come home from school and fill up notebooks with different sketches and drawings. And she really didn't care very much about computers until one day, one of her friends told her about a program called Scratch. And with Scratch, she could make her drawings come alive and be animated. And that was interesting for her. So she tried it out. And Scratch is a programming language developed by our group at the MIT Media Lab and allows you to take different types of images and music and sound and bring them to life. This is one of the first projects that she did. She took one of her drawings and she programmed it so the eyes and the ears would move a little bit. You see how there's just adding a little bit of animation. To create this, she stacked together graphical programming blocks, somewhat like putting together Lego bricks. And those programming blocks control the animation, telling the eyes how to move and the ears how to move. So she was excited about this, not because she wanted to grow up to become a programmer, but because it was something that let her express her ideas in a new way. So she continued to use Scratch and try new things. A few weeks later, this is a project that she worked on. It was a game called Lemonade Time, where it was a game where you use the arrow keys to move a character, an animal, the otter, and move it around to gather the ingredients for making lemonade. So as you play this game that she created, you can ask for advice from the bird and the frog about how it is you can get all the ingredients you need. Now, one thing that was very important about this game is this girl, her username on Scratch was Ipsy. Ipsy didn't just play the game herself, she shared it in the Scratch online community. With Scratch, after you create a project, you can share it so other people can try your game. This is the page on Scratch where she shared her game, and you can see there that 17,000 people played her game. And almost 2,000 people said they loved her game. And almost 100 people remixed her game. What that means is they took her game, they looked at the programming code, and they started making changes to add new features and to change it in different ways so people can build on each other's work. There's also 1,800 comments where people gave her feedback and suggestions and encouragement. And you can tell that Ipsy was paying attention to the comments because if you look at the instructions, she edited them to say, due to popular demand, the otter walks a little faster now. So she was learning how to become a good designer, to listen to your audience, to get ideas, and to try new things. Many of the comments said that they really liked her artwork. And they said, could you show more projects with other artwork? We would like to use some of your artwork. So Ipsy made a project like this. She branded it Ipsy Studio and showed a collection of different artwork. And she said in the project, she said, you can edit these images as much as you want, but it's important to give me credit. So she was learning to become a good citizen in this online community. A good citizen will share with others, but also it's important to be able to give credit and acknowledgement to others. At first, Ipsy, like many of the kids, thought it was a problem if someone took her project and made changes to it. And she said, they're stealing my ideas. But she came to recognize that when everyone shares, everyone benefits. So she was learning to grow up in an open source society where everyone could build on each other's work. So if we look at these projects, what is it that Ipsy was learning? Certainly, she was learning some technical skills. She was learning the skills of programming a computer. And as part of that, she was learning to reason systematically, to be able to go through and problem solve in a very logical way. And of course, that's a valuable skill to have. But I think even more importantly, Ipsy was learning to think creatively. She was coming up with new ideas, new ways to express her ideas, to share her ideas with other people, to come up with ways to have an art gallery that she could share with others. She was developing an entrepreneurial approach where she was offering consulting services to make projects, to make images for other people. And she was learning to work collaboratively, to be part of a community where she was learning with and from others. And I think these skills are important for everybody. So the goal is not for Ipsy to grow up to become a programmer. Just as when we teach writing to children, we don't expect everyone to become a professional writer. But when you learn to write, you learn how to organize and express and share your ideas. And Ipsy was learning the same thing through coding, how to organize and share and express her ideas. She was not just developing her thinking, but developing her voice to share her ideas and developing her identity as someone who could use new technology to create things and share things with the rest of the world. So I think those are the type of things that will be so important in the era of AI. It's not about getting the technical skills, but being able to think creatively, come up with new ideas and new approaches for the ever-changing situations that you'll face in a fast-changing world. We know that the world is changing very quickly, and today's children will face a never-ending stream of new and unknown and uncertain situations. So success and happiness in the future will be based on the ability to think and act creatively. And that's what Ipsy was doing. So how can we support children growing up as creative thinkers? As we've worked on this in my group, we focused on 4 guiding principles that in English all start with the letter P: projects, passion, peers, and play. We've seen that children develop their creative capacities when they're working on projects based on their passions, working on things they're interested in, collaborating with peers, sharing and learning with others, and doing it in a playful spirit. And when I say playful spirit, I mean that they're experimenting and trying new things and testing the boundaries, just as Ipsy was doing. So you can see Ipsy, in her work on Scratch, was really following these 4 guiding principles of working on projects based on her passions and collaboration with peers in a playful spirit. And we've seen over and over that when people work on things they really care about, as Ipsy was doing, they're willing to work longer and harder and persist in the face of challenges, and they make deeper connections with the ideas. And that's what we need to do. I know here in Japan, there's efforts that starting in 2020, children will all be learning programming. And I think that could be good, but not only if they're learning the technical skills. It only will really prepare children for the future if it's done in alignment with the 4 Ps. But it's great to see some examples of how that is starting to happen. We've been very fortunate to collaborate with the Mori Building Company on some summer workshops. Here's the summer workshop that they did last summer that several members of our group collaborated on, where children used our Scratch software to create a town where they would want to live. Let me show you this video. It's about a minute-long video of the workshop where it shows how children use Scratch to think about how they would make a city and think about the city of tomorrow.
アイデア出しとかもう実際に街づくりをし始めてもらってると思うんですけれども、ぜひみんなで一つの街を。
You have been generating ideas. You have been generating ideas. I hope you can do a good job on this project. That's good. Aquarium is what I worked on. So time for the presentations. There will be houses in the natural environment. This is the theater. The dog is following me. I can see that the train is operating. So in your studies, you should have the same attitude as you've shown in this project. It was a lot of fun. I love working with the teacher. I was able to work on this freely.
I really like the part there where they put all their different tablets together. It shows, again, the peers part of doing the collaborative work of building a city and designing a city requires you working together with others, the way they did here. Actually, I saw more great examples just last night. I was fortunate to go to a meetup of young people from Japan. I was going to say Tokyo, but actually some of the kids came all the way from Osaka to join this meetup last night. And it was of kids who were using Scratch to share with each other what they were doing. So I was so impressed with what they were doing. I'll just share a few examples of things I saw last night of how children here in Japan are using Scratch to use their imagination and to express themselves creatively. Here was one project by a girl that was designing her own city in Scratch, and it was focused on all different types of stores. You can move a character, go to different stores, buy different things, and set up to be able to be part of this community. This is a project by a girl who made a puzzle game with many different levels, and this was so successful, she was invited to the Coder Dojo International event in Ireland, where she won the world's best web-based game. Even younger children, this is a first grader who is using our Scratch Junior software for younger kids, making an animated story. Or this boy made a simulation of the subway system of Tokyo that was incredibly realistic and even connected it to a certain joystick like a train controller and figured out the right way of connecting that. And maybe I was most amazed at this project. I don't know if you can see, he's holding up something that was knitted. Actually, his mother knitted some fabric with the Scratch cat, the symbol of Scratch. But she was able to do it because he made a Scratch project. You could put any image and it would scan the image on the screen and print out knitting instructions. So he's working together with his mother. He would create the knitting instructions and then she would actually create for him. So we see the possibilities when we give kids the right type of tools and support that enables them to express themselves creatively in this way. Let me say a few things about some of the next directions we're going to make sure that we can continue to open up those possibilities for kids. And here we're trying to put the power of AI in the hands of kids. So as we're adding new capabilities to Scratch, we know that today kids, there are many devices, they can use their voice to talk to devices, but it's like magic. They just talk to the device, it does something. We want kids to have the power to put that in their own projects. So we're experimenting with adding new blocks to Scratch. You can have a block that listens. Like there's a block that says, when I hear a certain phrase, it will do something. So kids can make their projects respond to voice commands. So like here's a little example where the project says, when I hear the phrase, what time is it? It will say, it's party time, and make a party simulation. So if I say, what time is it?
Party time.
It will then respond. We also want Scratch not just to be on the screen, but to connect to the world. Actually, this is a workshop that I did last week in Korea at a makerspace where kids were using a new type of device called the microbit. There's a low-cost controller that can communicate with the computer. And what we're doing is having kids make games or stories on the screen, but then also make their own controllers to control what they're doing. Let me show you a quick example. I'm going to switch over to Scratch. So here's Scratch. I'll make it full screen. So this is a project that was a game that's a flying bicycle. And if I start the game, the bicycle can be controlled by tilting it. I can get the balloons as they come. Now again, children play games like this all the time. What we want is that oh, I got a taco. But again, children can make any game or story they want and any type of device they want in order to control it. So in fact, at this workshop last week, we had kids making all different types of things. They cut a ball in half to make a little cup that would catch things as they flew. They used a doll from home to attach this to control their games. So all different types of things they were making. Now, of course, we have to remember, though, it's not just the technology. This technology will only make a difference if we provide it to kids in a way that will allow them to express themselves creatively and think creatively. So I think our goal is to take these ideas and make sure they get out to the world in a way that educators and parents introduce them to kids where kids can use them to work on their own projects based on their own passions in collaboration with peers in a playful spirit. I write about these ideas in my book, Lifelong Kindergarten, that recently came out in Japan with a preface from Joey. So I hope you'll take a look at that if you're interested in getting more deeply with these ideas. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mitch.
So this presentation by Professor Resnick, I think what is important in this presentation is that computer technology, it's not just teaching computer technology, but also the thoughts and creativity is promoted, and computer is only a tool. I think that's the important point. Next speaker is Mr. Kawashima from Niantic. I am a big fan of their game, so I'm looking forward to this. Thank you very much. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much for today. I will speak in Japanese. I'm in charge of Japanese, so I'll do this in Japanese. First of all, this forum thinks seriously about education, but we are one of the casual players making games, and it may feel odd that we are taking part in the serious forum, but Niantic is using technology seriously to think of what we can do for the education. That's one side of our company. So let me share with you what we learned and share this information with you. So please take a look at this video. This is Taiwan. 2 years ago, something happened. What they are doing is there was a kabigun. Do you know what kabigun is? It's a rare Pokemon. So this is what happened in Taiwan. Now, why did so many people move? We were surprised that this happened. Niantic, Joe Hanke, he was a former Google vice president. Niantic was an internal startup of Google. And John Hanke started this. Before coming to Google, he was in Keyhole, Google Earth, the former Google Earth. And by joining Google, he became the vice president and had been leading the team of developing the Google Map. Now, in front of screen, Google Math and Google Earth and Map and Street, he designed something that can have a good world view. But then he realized that the last one step is to go there in person and use the five senses to feel something. We need to cherish the feeling. So how can we move people to those places? And so that was his original concept. Niantic's mission is adventures on foot. So take adventure on foot. So with family members, use technology to do more adventure and make the world a more exciting place. However, to get to that point, we need to get outside, go outside. So we need a step to go outside. So first, to go outside, people have to move. You cannot just sit in front of the desk. And the population in the world, on average, spend around 9 hours in front of the screen, and children about 3 hours a day in front of the screens. So children are not doing enough exercise to be able to do that. So many people are having lack of exercise. So in order to improve this, what can technology do? That was one challenge Niantic took up. So how can we move people outside, promote them to move? And once people go out, they explore. In cities, there are things that are being overlooked. As you see on the right side, this one. The normal technology, like Google Map, from point A to point B, you can get there in 15 minutes. You think of the shortest path. And this is the correct way of using technology, but what we want to do is the right side. From point A to point B, we spend 1.5 hours to move around and meander. Some people may think this is stupid, but Niantic thinks this is serious. This is the most important thing. So from the office to home, if you walk, there are things you may have not noticed for years, but you may notice them from some small trigger. So this allows you to understand the community and to have more affection to the community. And lastly, social. Now, people have individual experience and have interaction in front of screens. And as a result, people tend to be isolated. So in the real world, interact with people. We wanted to do something like that. So I wanted people to adventure together. Now, a bit objective and key result. Our mission, our priority is this. This is what we do our business for. We want to improve the world by motivating people to exercise and be social and discover the real world. Now, to do that, we made this field trip application. Oh, just a moment. Now, this is Google Glass. Do you remember Google Glass? It moves, software. So from this point, AR, augmented reality, was utilized to get people outside to do something. Google Glass, you walk around, and when you go to a nice site, you can experience the history automatically. It is displayed automatically, and the related information and history and the important things in the community can be automatically understood. So if you come to Roppongi Hills, you can understand its history. That was the objective of this software. Now, this application, after developing this application, we realized that it doesn't work if we only be serious. It doesn't get through if we're only serious. So when you go there, the context or the situation around the person need to be understood. And the technology was not that far enough, so it did not work. So John, he said, at home, his child was doing game in front of sofa, and it was a great day, gorgeous day, but this child was inside. So he wanted his child to go outside in this nice blue sky of California. How can my child go outside? So he thought using game to realize this. So he came up with Ingress. Now, the artistic sculptures and libraries or post office or important community sites in the town. Portal, exotic matter comes out. And this is a territorial game where you try to control the sites through blue and green. So you go to these historic sites, and you need to know who is foe, who is a friend. It's a mysterious experience in real life. So you can change the real life into a mysterious place. We were worried if this will really bring people out, but it worked. In the baby car, mothers can have fun, and Cessna, you can access a portal where you cannot normally reach, or climb a mountain, or change a wheelchair. And the person did not want to go outside with a wheelchair, but by playing this game, the person started enjoying going outside and eventually participated in event outside of the country. So real-world events is something we cherish very much. How can we connect people through games in real world and have people meet with each other in the real world? In hundreds of sites, we've been doing events. Now, Mission Day, this is a portal, is linked like Stamp Rally, and users try to promote their own region, like Ishinomaki City. So portal is connected as like Stamp Rally to attract people. This is Mission Day. It's not sponsored by Niantic. It is a user-structured event. In 2016, in Odaiba, we had an event. 15,000, it says 10,000 here, but 15,000 people came to Odaiba from 20 countries in the world to try to control the turf and territory. More than 91% of the players found friends in the real world through this game, and 30% of the players dated someone they met while playing the game. And 47% have traveled more than 100 kilometers, and 15% walked for over 1,000 kilometers. 19% taken a plane flight to travel to an Ingress event for the first time. And I saw many people who got the passport for the first time to come to this event. And close to 20% traveled to another country, and 9% have traveled to continent. And 60% have lost weight. They lost weight. 85% reduced the time spent in front of the screen. And this is Joyce-san. February 2016, Joyce-san, he was level 13 Ingress agent. He was super high. So to improve the level, he tweeted. It was before Pokemon Go. And Joyce-san came to Niantic. And Joe Hanke and us, we had a meeting together. And this is Innovation City Forum here in Roppongi Hills, Niantic Mori building event. This led to this event today. And AR and Mori garden. It's taking place in various places, so please come and enjoy. So this meeting 2 years ago has led to this event, and I'm so happy to see this. Joy-san, before Pokemon Go, Joy-san came and paid attention to Niantic, and I'm so thankful for that. Now, 6 to 8 months later, after this meeting, oh, does it come up? Ingress. This knowledge that we cultivated, capability to move people and improve through AI, we tried to think of something after Ingress. And we arrived at this after much exploration. Pokemon Go. So it was less than a year after Joy-san came to us. So Pokemon Go, this is San Francisco. The players led this event. Close to 9,000 people walked together to enjoy Pokemon Go. So this was the event. And we saw this and were surprised. Pokemon Company President Ishihara played Ingress. And he went up to the level of Joy-san in a very short period of time. And in Google, control film lecture was done by him, even. So he felt the possibility of Ingress, and that led to the success of Pokemon Go. So this is the graph after launch. I will be very quick. Orange is our expectation, access, number of access. And red, this is where the server will go down. And green was the actual. In order to prevent the server from going down, Google put so much effort. And I thank Google for that. The engineers worked day and night to make this happen. And so it was an unprecedented launch. Now, around the world, we have more than this. 800 million downloads. And through Pokemon Go, people walked to a total of more than 15.8 billion kilometers. This Pluto and Sun is about, it's 3 times more than the distance between Sun and Pluto. So how can this be used for health? Many people thought of health promotion. Library, Ingress Poder, is used for Pokestop. So libraries are Pokestop too. Before that, children come to front of the library, so we tried to let them in. Many librarians used ingenuity to allow children to come into the library. And another happy surprise was seniors, elderlies, to play with their grandchildren. They played Pokemon, and they continued even after the grandchildren stopped playing Pokemon. And some said, I had a nice conversation with my wife for the first time in a long while, or I talked with my children through this. So they exchanged Pokemon, and gather in a battle, join hands in the battle. So these connections also occurred in lecture sessions. Elderlies said they have health problems, social problems, and we hear these news a lot. But what I feel is that elderlies enjoy even half an hour a day using fingers and go out and interact with children and of all ages. This can lead to a reduction in medical cost. I hope this will happen. Now, my favorite team members, the father, this is in Philippines, the father enjoys Pokemon with his family. He has a very big battery pack, and the family members are connected with cable, so literally they're connected. Now, the communication or walking, more peers, more friends. This was Kao's survey. We didn't pay them to do this. They did it independently. And so they did enjoy it while they took a walk or did shopping in the neighborhood. And their feelings changed. They now have objective of now opportunity to go out or refresh. And these are the actual voices. I never thought I would walk so much. And I only walked between my office and home, but now I get off the bus one step before and walk longer. Good opportunity to walk more. So these are the voices. So across generations, everyone can smile. I think this is the power game has. This is in Seattle. Ingress Blair. She is an 80-year-old lady. She had diabetes and had difficulty walking, but her son thought that this will be good for her rehabilitation and asked her to do Ingress. And this lady who did not walk now walks 3 miles a day. And she now walked 1,500 kilometers, about half the distance of Japan. And now in the local community, she is a bridge in the local community and sometimes bake apple pie to the events and playing a very important role in the event in the community. This is what Niantic wants to realize. We want go through portals and so many portals in MIT. I want to ask Joyce-san what he found. We want to look at community once again so that we can go across race and gender and culture and language and connect. We want to use the power of game to make this happen. Now, I think this is the end. So, Mori identified with us. So, Air Playground, Niantic's latest cutting-edge technology is displayed. It's close by. And this neon, it's the first announcement to the world, to the public. And in Moribiru's urban area, the field that the players made are displayed. And Mori Garden is using sound. So hear the sound of Pokemon to find. So it's an AR using the audio function of human beings. So if you have opportunity, please come here and enjoy. Thank you very much.
はい、川島さん本当に
Thank you very much, Kawashima-san. In his presentation, he talked about passion and peers. He talked about the importance thereof, and in yogis, I have walked 548 kilometers playing Ingress, so it contributed to my health. Now, my sister, Mimi Ito's presentation will be provided. She has an expert in cultural anthropologist and learning and social relationship. The importance of the connectivity of these are being emphasized. Inclusive of social infrastructure, how connectivity can be achieved will be presented by Mimi Ito.
Several years ago, when my daughter was 16 and just starting high school, she came up to me and said, "Mom, I want to learn how to play guitar." She had been a longtime viola player, but more recently she had become interested in popular music, so she wanted to learn an instrument that was more in line with those interests and what her friends were playing. So I looked at her and I said, "Honey, you're pretty busy. You're just getting into the routine of high school. Are you sure you want to add one more thing?" She looks at me and says, "Mom, look, we already have a guitar. I have friends who can help me learn. It's really not a big deal. I'll just learn on my own." And then I look at her and I say, "Honey, it's not that simple. We're going to have to find a teacher. You're going to have to take lessons. You're going to have to practice. You really have to apply yourself if you want to learn something." So she turns to me. I get the look. I get the sigh. And she says, "Mom, that's what the internet is for." So the conversation really stuck with me because I study digital kids and I study learning, and I think of myself as a pretty tech-savvy mom. But even for me, there was a big gap between how my daughter thought of learning and how I thought of learning. I was over here thinking that learning had to be led by experts and structured in certain ways, and she was growing up in an environment where everything she was interested in, she could find at her fingertips. So it turns out she had already been online, was watching YouTube videos for beginning guitar, and had already picked up the basics of how to play. So I think the challenge in front of us today is how can we support young people like my daughter and the young people you heard of from Mitch and Kawashima-san who are growing up in a context of absolute abundance in terms of access to information, to communities of interest, to specialized knowledge. Our institutions of education, our colleges, our universities, our museums were founded in an era that was quite different from where young people are growing up now. It was an era of information scarcity when, in order to gain access to specialized kinds of knowledge, you had to have a teacher, a professor, you had to go somewhere special like a museum or library in order to gain access to knowledge. But today, all of those forms of expertise, those communities of interest are much more abundant and available to young people. So things have really changed in terms of how much young people are engaging with media. So these are surveys from, that folks have been conducting in the US for many, many years. And like you saw in some of the statistics that you heard from the previous speakers, the number of hours that young people are engaged in media has been increasing every year. So last year's survey showed that young people were engaged with some form of media. This includes music in the US for about 9 hours a day. This is more time than they spend sleeping. This is more time than they spend at school. And in fact, they're able to pack 11 hours of media into that 9 hours because they're multitasking. So what happens when these always connected young people encounter our institutions of education, our lecture halls, our classrooms? This is research about students' level of engagement with schooling. So we know that when young kids start school, they're pretty excited. They're lifelong kindergartners, right? They're excited and eager to learn. But by the time they reach high school, about half of them are disengaged. So this issue of engagement, about the fact that schools and teachers can be boring, this is actually nothing new. There's always been a culture clash between the kind of learning that young people do in school and the kind of fun and playful learning that young people are doing after school. But now that young people are growing up in an environment where outside of the classroom there's so much more that's engaging, that's purposeful, that's meaningful for them to learn, that culture clash is becoming even more acute. So let me make it a little bit more concrete. Like Mitch, I'm going to share an example of a learner. So I'm a cultural anthropologist, and most of my time is spent hanging out with young people, playing games on the internet. We've studied fan communities, a lot of gaming communities. We've studied anime fans and popular culture, kids engaged in popular culture. And this story comes from a study we did of young girls who were fan fiction writers on the internet. And when we met Abigail, she was 14, and she was a fan of Harry Potter and also a fan of the boy band One Direction, which I think was popular here for a little bit as well. So when she got her own smartphone, she went online and started reading fan fiction around Harry Potter and eventually around One Direction as well. And then eventually she got up the courage to write her own stories and publish them online on Wattpad, which is an online publishing platform that's probably the biggest in the US for fan fiction writers. She was really nervous at first, but eventually she published her work and she started getting a following, and people started to give her feedback, and she started getting better at writing. And in part because of her experience on Wattpad, she decided that she was really interested in writing, and her mom was actually very supportive, and she decided in high school to go to a special high school that would enable her to focus more on writing. So Abigail is an example of what we call a connected learner. She's somebody who had a passionate interest. For her, it was popular culture like Harry Potter and One Direction. She was able to find friends, peers, relationships who supported those interests. And she was also able to connect the learning she was doing with her friends and based on her interests to opportunity, which was about connecting those interests to school. So you'll see this has a lot in common with what Mitch was talking about in terms of the 4 Ps of kids engaged in something passionate together with peers who share that sense of purpose. And then the last piece is whether young people can actually connect the learning that they're doing for fun when it's driven by their interests to helping them find their place in the world, whether that's through advancing in school, through engagement in the community, or through finding a career pathway. So I'm so glad to be following Mitch and Kawashima-san, who have given you a deep picture of what it looks like when young people are engaged in creative and social learning. And I'm zooming out just a little bit to think, what does that experience of creative learning, of game-based learning look like in the broader arc of young people's lives? So the moral of the story of Abigail is not that games and the internet, even really fabulous online communities like you've heard from Mitch and Kawashima-san, they don't on their own make connected learners. In fact, most young people are struggling to connect the learning they're doing in school to the learning they're doing out of school. In fact, we've interviewed thousands of young people, and almost all young people have interests, and a lot of young people are geeking out on those interests with friends, but very few young people are able to connect those digital interests to things that matter for them in school. So when we talk to young people, this is from another fan that we interviewed as part of our One Direction fandom study, they talk about how profound the relationships are that they discovered when the relationships are centered around a passion, whether it's gaming or an online community like Scratch, or whether it's a fandom like we saw with One Direction. Here's a quote from a young girl who was fairly introverted who said, "I made my first ever true friend about 2 months ago. I was looking for someone to play the lead on my next story, and she offered. From then, we started to talk more, and she's 4 years older than me, and she's really nice." So this is an example, again, of these mixed stage communities that the internet and digital media are supporting that enable young people to really find their people. Now, the thing that makes it really challenging, though, is when we talk to young people, they're so excited and enthused about their passions, but very few of them are sharing what they're doing with their parents or their teachers, especially for an interest like boy band fandom. A lot of grown-ups aren't very appreciative, and we see that with games as well. So when we ask young people, they'll say, oh, the school doesn't encourage it. 80% of the girls in our grade have Wattpad, but it's like a private thing between students and friends. And I've interviewed a lot of anime fans here too, and they say exactly the same thing. They say when we write about 1D, we don't really want the teachers to know. They definitely wouldn't get it, and plus they would ask questions. So when we interview young women, they're reading hundreds of pages of fan fiction online. A lot of them are even writing their own stories. But when we ask them, are you a reader? They say no. If we ask them, are you a writer? They say no. And we say, well, what do you mean? What does a reader or a writer mean to you? And they say, well, that's what you do in school. That's not what we're doing. So there's a huge generation gap, again, just like with me and my daughter. Now, you heard the stories of friendships that were fostered through Ingress and Pokemon Go. When we started our research with digital kids about 10 years ago, people were felt it was still a little bit creepy to make friends on the internet, but this has really changed. So a survey done a couple years ago showed that the majority of young people, and it's not just gaming geeks, but just all young people, are meeting new people on the internet. With boys, they're usually meeting new friends through games. For girls, it's through social media. So more and more, we're finding that young people are turning to online networks to really find the people they connect with. So there's a real opportunity in front of us with all of these new networked media, the ability to connect with specialized affinity groups, to connect the learning across young people's lives. When we think of learning from the point of view of a young person, they care about their interests, who they are, who they want to connect with, and it's really up to us to meet young people where they are and try to support the learning based on what drives them and motivates them and interests them. Oops. So part of the problem, though, is that when we think about learning, we usually think about it as a pipeline, and our goal as parents or as educators is to keep pushing kids up this pipeline. But when you look at what it actually takes for young people to be successful, especially in really high fast-paced innovation type environments, creative professions, coding, things like that. There's a whole community, a web of connections that sits behind these young people, caring adults, institutions like museums and libraries, online communities, and that's what young people really need to succeed. They need the formal instruction, but they also need the connections to many different parts of their lives. So when we talk about connected learning, we describe it as a kind of learning that is really meaningful to young people when you're doing something you really care about with the support of friends, and it's tied to your finding your place in the world. But it's also a set of design principles, and like Mitch, I have 4 design principles for connected learning, which I'll describe just very quickly in relation to a few learning environments that my colleagues and I have been involved in. So one is the U-Media Learning Labs, which is a network of about 24 now digital maker spaces for young people in museums and libraries all across the US right now. The very first U-Media Lab was opened in the Harold Washington Library in Chicago, which is the main downtown library, and they opened up a teen space on the first floor where young people could come in, check out laptops, play video games. They had access to a sound studio, lots of opportunities for digital making, and it was the first time that the library let young people bring food into the library and be loud and just make things together. So the first principle, design principle, is sponsorship of youth interests. And this just means taking our institutions like our Mori birus and our libraries and museums and making them a space where young people can do what they want to do. So for U-Media, it was making music, it was about rapping, it was about playing video games and other kinds of digital interests. We also develop shared practices, which basically means things for kids to do together. So whether it's playing video games or making music or rapping, there's sort of a consistent set of activities that kids can do within that space. It's not enough just to have the space. We brought in teaching artists and librarians who, made sure there were workshops and things for kids to do. And it was done in a context of shared purpose. So not only are kids creating things, but they're sharing things in a way that's meaningful to the community. Just like you saw with the Scratch community, if you're a spoken word artist, what you see here is the weekly open mic night where kids show up and they give something of value to the community by doing a performance. So that's just one example. And then finally, even though it's a physical space, there's lots of effort put into making connections outside of the space. So it's not like we expect the kids' learning to only happen within the library, but the artists are connecting the students to competitions across Chicago. The video gamers are making podcasts that they put on the internet for other people to enjoy. And the final example is a nonprofit that I helped co-found called Connected Camps, which is very different from UMedia and being a totally online program for summer camps and after-school programs that are staffed by virtual counselors who are high school and college kids who we train to work with younger kids. Again, we meet young people where they are. We work within the game of Minecraft, which is a very popular game. We do programs in Scratch, so things that kids are already engaged in. And then we have a consistent set of camps and after-school programs where kids do things like game design, they do coding, they do theater productions, and so on. And the counselors create, again, a sense of shared purpose so that when you make a game, it's a game that the community can also play. So you're not just making it for yourself, you're making it for a bigger purpose. And then finally, games like Minecraft and also communities like Scratch and a lot of gaming communities are already openly networked environments where kids can share what they do on YouTube. They can make contributions to the Scratch online community. So there's an opportunity to start building relationships and visibility way outside of the settings that we specifically support. So there's lots more examples of connected learning environments, and we have a broader community that is putting these ideas into practice. And I look forward to talking to you all more about it too. Thank you.
Thank you, Mimi. で、ミミのプレゼンテ
So with Mimi-san's presentation, now you have a better idea of innovative society, urban side. So I hope Director Nanjo could comment later. So from here, we will do a panel discussion. So in addition to the three presenters and Mr. Ito, please come up to the stage.
さあそしてさらにここから
And furthermore, we will have Director Nanjo of Mori Art Museum and Mr. Wu from MIT Media Lab. So the two are Director Fumio Nanjo of Mori Art Museum and MIT Media Lab researcher Mr. Andre Wu. So I would like to ask Mr. Joichi Ito to moderate, please.
南條さんから
So Director Nanjo, could you start? So I'm not in the education expert, but I'm the director of the 53rd floor of this building, Mori Art Museum. And education is a very important component of art museum. This word education, we decided not to use it, and we used the word public program. But in 2017, last year, we changed from public program to learning. And Guggenheim and Tate Modern, we worked with them to have a large-scale symposium. Around 30 people attended, mostly museum-related people. So, through this effort, We thought that the way education is promoted is different and changing. And art, on the other hand, is also changing. More than 10 years ago, a French art critic said relational art, came up with a concept of relational art. It will have relation with spectators, so more art as relationship with viewers. So the viewers can write on the art. Ms. Yoko Ono's work is like that. So they can come and write on the art, like graffiti. So the form of art is changing. And another thing in Japan is in region countryside, there are many art festivals, Biennale and Triennale. These art festivals are now held. And the centerpiece of the art are, in most cases, socially engaged art. So it's where the workshop is done with the community or produce work together with the community. So looking at all these trends, I feel that the art itself, education has to have the playfulness and the learning aspect and experimenting aspect and being creative. So the border is disappearing and it is not clearly delineated anymore. The border is becoming more ambiguous, and so this entire process is becoming the part of education. And this is a report from the 2017 symposium, and it says the head of the education department of Tate Modern said something very interesting. They said, in the world, who we are, what we are, we need to change the way we think of who we are and what we are in the world. So he says methodology. And this is exactly links to what you said. So design experience, young people, and of course elderlies. Learning is to design the experience. That's my impression. Thank you very much.
で、ここで英語に切り替え
Now we are going to go to English now. So those of you who need translation into Japanese, please use the receivers.
Andre, first of all, I think the difference between education and learning is very important, because I always think that education is things that other people do to you and learning is what you do for yourself. But recently, Andre and I collaborated on a book by NHK Publishing, and he wrote a chapter on unschooling, which I think is even more radical than the shift from just education to learning, but it's a fundamentally a new way of thinking about children and our relationship with them. And I wonder if you can describe that and any other thoughts that you have. And our kids, actually, the reason I know about Andre, he studies other things, but we have two kids that play together, and I learned about unschooling through Andre as the parent.
Yeah, so hello, I'm here today in the capacity of being a parent of two children, and I'm part of a growing movement which is happening around the world, which is called unschooling. Unschooling is considered as a subset of homeschooling. So children do not go to school, but they are staying with their families at home. But the difference to classical homeschooling is that you do not replicate a curriculum-based learning at home, but leave it completely up to the child how it wants to engage with the world, what it wants to learn, and how. So it's a form of self-directed education. And unschoolers currently are in growing numbers. I think at this point in the US, it's between 200 and 300,000 people, and every year the number is growing. And basically, it really connects to the three presentations that we've seen today. I think that the unschooling community really tries to embrace the awareness that learning has fundamentally changed with the onset of digital technologies, and that the educational institutions, including schools, are not able to keep up with the changes that are coming along with it. Schools have been part of a design to create a workforce for the 20th century industrial economy. But as we are shifting towards a post-industrial economy, where, for example, AI algorithms can excel in university entrance examinations or do many other jobs, we were really asking the question, so what does it mean actually to learn in the 21st century, and what kind of skills and values especially do we want to raise our new generation in? And so unschoolers, so this is the basic explanation of unschooling, and as you can imagine, as it's self-directed, each family has a very different style because every child is different. So some children really enjoy a more traditional type of learning. They're working with textbooks and with going to libraries and taking online classes. But other kids are much more drawn to online communities. I know of many kids, for example, who have learned to read and write by playing Minecraft or by coding in Scratch. So the idea is that every child has its own path of learning and every child has its own unique abilities, but the current educational system sort of tries to have a one-size-fits-all model that just is not able anymore to accommodate the diversity of talents that we have out there and that are also being accommodated by new media. So unschoolers access libraries a lot, museums a lot, online spaces, of course, and there is a growing number of self-directed learning centers around the world, and especially in the US, which is basically spaces where you pay an annual membership fee and where children can gather and have access to resources, different educational materials, but especially also have access to a community of other unschoolers across different ages, because as we have also seen in the presentations, that learning is inherently social. So for the unschooling community, it's very important to create a social space. And what I'm here today to offer is sort of to imagine how we might be able to restructure our current schools in ways that they look more like museums or libraries or online spaces, like spaces that are more open and decentralized in ways that children have a more individual access to them and the ability to use them in ways that are most useful for them. And on a more sort of fundamental level, which connects to yesterday's conversations around values and the idea of happiness, is also what kind of values emerge from a community that is always driven by meaningfulness rather than by sort of extrinsic motivation. So you see in many unschooling communities that children do not necessarily define success by how much they are able to master the system, how fast they can advance in the economic paradigm. But to many unschooled children, there's no value judgment or no difference between choosing, for example, to be a company CEO or a farm worker or a stay-at-home parent or university professor. So what kind of society can we imagine in an age where technologies are sort of fundamentally disrupting our current economic system and social spheres, that we understand, that there are different roles in society and there's a different space beyond just the economic paradigm that we are currently measuring success in.
Thank you. And I think it's, I think about, in Japanese, there's a word called oriko-san, which is, I guess, would roughly translate to smart child or something like that, but it often has this connotation of being very obedient and being very structured. And it's sort of the opposite of unschooling, where they're being measured against a fairly formal system. And I think so a couple questions. And first of all, I wonder if anybody has any comments or questions on unschooling before we move on.
I dropped out from the university, so I was unschooled. Yeah. So I really think that it was. I appreciated the parents just allowed me to do that. Kind of, now I can kind of feel that. Probably kind of, if I'm Oriko-san, I should make a different decision, kind of maybe. But since I really think, I agree to the, unschooling kind of, the philosophy kind of, it's one of the choice that people can take. Yeah, and I'm here. So it's a good yeah.
So you have in common, yeah.
I think maybe the one strongest thing that connected all of the presentations is this idea of interest and passion, and building on your interests and seeing that as the way for people really to succeed, and maybe more important now than ever before, as you were saying, in the new society for people to be able to follow their interests and build it, to find their own pathway. I liked it was shown in a somewhat different way, but the image that you showed of the straight line versus the winding path, you were talking about it actually geographically, but also just how we lead our lives.
Yes.
Too often lives are go to point A to point B, and schools focus on efficiency, how to solve something most efficiently, but oftentimes the most creative explorations come when you're taking that wandering path.
Yes.
And one thing that is kind of a detail, but I think an important one, is that most schools are age segregated, where you're always with the same class. And you showed a kid at a different age. Kawashima-san, in the while we were talking earlier, you mentioned that adults can't talk to children, but when they're playing Pokemon together, they have a reason to talk to each other. And
they can teach each other, and sometimes junior people teaches, and sometimes kids teaches to the old people. Yeah. That's kind of pretty,
And I think, there's a interesting, I was talking to a science historian who studied Nobel Prize winners. And usually in most of these Nobel Prize winners, there's somebody in their childhood who is not their parent, who nudges the child to get passionate about something or to reinforce something they're already passionate about. And I think this relationship with people in different ages is extremely important, and another reason why the kind of traditional educational system is fairly broken, right?
Yeah, I think that the point that it's kind of creepy for kids to talk to grown-ups without a shared interest or activity or purpose is a really important one. And we find that online too, where, when we were doing research with young people, they have, whether it's Facebook or Snapchat or Line or whatever, that they have networks that are about the people they know in the community, and there they don't want the grown-ups to be in there. But when they're in interest communities like gaming or Scratch, then it's intergenerational, and they actually want the grown-ups as part of that space. So it's really important to design for environments that support intergenerational connection around interests, and that's when you find that magic happening. Unfortunately, schools tend not to be designed that way because it's age segregated, and then the teacher, it's like students know that the teacher isn't a One Direction fan, or it has to be a real interest. So what we find in studies of mentorship is that when you have affinity-based mentorship, so mentorship that's matched based on interests, it's the effect side is tremendous. But then if you match kids with adults and they don't have an interest, it actually sets kids back. It's actually a negative. So if you have a negative relationship to a teacher or a mentor, then it damages your self-concept. So it's actually really important that it's the right kind of intergenerationality. And I think that's why spaces like museums, for example, are very powerful, because they're interest-driven spaces where you get to interact and choose to interact with specialists that you care about, similarly with gaming communities. But it does mean that you have to enable students, young people, to actually choose and select those relationships. And that's how it's quite different from how we've designed most of our education system.
And we need adults to start thinking about learning and teaching in a new way. Mm-hmm. We also started some after-school centers called computer clubhouses, much like the U Media centers that Mimi talked about. And mentors played an important role there. We found in the beginning, we really had to help adults understand what we meant by mentors, because they often went to one extreme or the other. They wanted to come in and teach something to the kids, or they stood back and said they should do whatever they want, and if they ask us for help, we'll come in and help. But we had a different sense, the same way you were saying that they should bring their own interests. We wanted mentors to come and work on their own projects, so kids both will be inspired to see that adults keep learning, and then we'll sort of make connections with them. We want to have a whole ecosystem of different mentors with different interests so that different kids would connect with them in different ways. but it really required the mentors to think about their role in new ways.
And that's kind of how Macomber Center works, right? Maybe you want to describe, you just have a lot of adults playing guitar, and then the kids go and hang out with whoever they want to.
So my children go to a self-directed learning center in the Boston area. It's called the Macomber Center for Self-Directed Learning. And it's there are currently, I think, 50 kids, and they are all in a shared space. Their age range is from 5 to 18. And as I described before, there are, a lot of resources. There's an arts room, a science space, a lot of books, a huge outdoor space, and kids basically spend their time in whichever way they find meaningful. They can come and go whenever they want. And there are adult staff members with different forms of expertise, different backgrounds, and they basically do the same. They spend their time in which ways they find meaningful, and they invite the kids to join them, but they will not force them to join if they're not interested in. And you can see in that space how naturally sort of different communities form around certain interests, and how infectious it is sort of to be passionate about something, because you can see sometimes that one child is starting something or an adult is starting something, and kids get into it, and after an hour you have the entire community sort of joining in and doing it. So it's really this, it really connects to the principles that Mitch, that you have mentioned too. So if you have a space that is flexible enough, or a structure that is flexible enough to allow for these passions to emerge, learning happens just by itself, and it does not need to be enforced.
Yeah, I think it illustrates sort of important set of principles or approaches in terms of affinity-based mentorship. We talk about how you have to both stock the pond and you have to teach kids how to fish. So stocking the pond is inviting parents and grown-ups to be in the space and have invitations. So you have to create occasions for, I think Pokemon Go is a great example. It's stocking the pond so that there's more opportunities out there. At Connected Camps, what we do is we recruit teenagers who are game otaku, and then we invite them to teach little kids. They don't usually get invited. So there's so many gamer nerds and coders on the internet who are actually really excited to teach younger kids what they know, but they're never given the invitation to be considered an educator. They're just experts, they're not educators. So there's things you can do to stock the pond. And then the other thing that I think unschooling demonstrates is you're giving kids space in which to learn how to fish. So it's hard for a kid. Like Joey actually was sort of my case study of a connected learner, because when he was a little kid, he would just run around the neighborhood and talk to grown-ups and find mentors. Like he was always fishing for mentors because he wasn't having fun at school. So he'd be at the aquarium shop or at the game arcade. But most kids are too scared to do that. So you have to create safe spaces where they can fish for their mentors and find others. And I think the Ingress Pokemon Go is like a metaphor for making the city a stage for kids to fish for mentors.
And I think for museums, it's similar. I think the traditional museum was really, you have, if you're not an artist or an art connoisseur, you kind of felt out of place. And it wasn't very accessible, and I think, Nanjo-san, I don't know if you have any thoughts, because I know you've said a controversial thing that maybe we should get rid of museums and just turn the city into a museum.
As I said, that there are many art festivals in the local cities, and in that case, usually the artworks are placed not in the galleries, but also in the town, outside, or maybe ordinary houses, or ruins, abandoned houses. And by this way, people have more, easy access to the art. And at the same time, if the artworks are old artworks, famous works by famous artists, are very expensive, right? We cannot place those things in the rough area, rough spaces. So naturally, the artworks becomes more of contemporary art, just made by artists. And the artist will explain to the people. So by this way, the distance between the production, artist, creativity, and the audience are much nearer than usual museum environment. So I think that those art festivals, now there are too many, some people criticize, but I think it's good for education, for local children. But I have one question to you, that you're all talking about very natural, spontaneous learning of children. But at the same time, there is a school, conventional school existing still. This school is trying to give the basic information, basic knowledge to the people, to the children. Do you think you can replace this system by the more spontaneous learning, enjoyable way of learning? Or you keep this conventional school and you add this more enjoyable learning system? What is the goal of you?
I think the meta question he's asking is, can we learn without suffering?
Good.
Giving the basic information to the children. This is one side. And if the children are learning by games or enjoyable workshop, sometimes they don't get the basic information, necessary information or something like that. So how do you see the balance between them?
I think pragmatically speaking, schools are going to be around for a while, and there will be folks who are pursuing alternatives like unschooling, which historically there have always been alternatives to schooling, but it's usually families who are more privileged, very well supported, who have the resources to support their kids in more flexible ways. And I think for a very long time still, there will still be the need for public schooling as a widespread and democratic alternative, even if it's just to create safe spaces for kids to be able to interact with adults. I think learning has already transformed in the sense that where kids are learning is happening in much more fluid ways. But it's sort of like the reason why with connected learning, we don't think of connected learning as all the learning, so that sometimes there's forms of learning that kids need to do that is about skills development, and that might not be something that's totally interest-driven. And sometimes kids need space to just have fun and for it not to be about learning. You don't want to colonize kids' social life and fun with learning all the time. So we think of connected learning as kind of the middle of the bullseye of the learning that is most about kids really discovering who they are and doing things they're passionate about. But then there are moments when kids are doing learning that they're exposed to at school where they might not think they're interested, but without environments where they're kind of being exposed to a lot of different things, where they're being pushed to try things out and practice things that they might not be interested in, they're also missing a piece of the overall puzzle, I think.
For me, the transformation I think that has to take place is that too often schools say that there's some core ideas that we want children to learn, and they have to learn the basics first, and then they can make use of them. And I think that's flawed. Yeah. I think we have to shift it. I agree that there are some core ideas in the world and in the culture that we do hope children will engage with. But rather than sort of learning the ideas and then using them, I think they should learn those ideas through using them. So this project-based approach of engaging kids and supporting kids in projects, I do think all the things that we hope children will learn can be done in the context of the meaningful projects they work on. But it leads to a different role for the mentors and the teachers to help highlight those ideas as they occur. So as they work on projects, for a mentor to say, oh, did you ever think about this? Because that will sort of engage them in a set of ideas that they might not have discovered totally on their own. So that's a new role for, just to give one example, I was working with a child using the Scratch programming language, and they were making a game, and they wanted to know how they were frustrated because they didn't know how to make it keep score. So this is a meaningful project they were doing, and to keep score, you can introduce a concept of variables, and they can use the variables to keep score. So I showed how to use variables, and the child reached out his hand to me and said, thank you, thank you, thank you. And I thought, how often does a teacher get thanked for introducing variables to children? And it does not happen in school because children don't know why they're learning variables. But I think that we can find ways that in the context of meaningful projects, children can learn things that are valuable and useful.
In Finland, which has one of the highest scores in terms of the quality of their education that's measured, is experimenting with just project-based learning, where they've gotten rid of all of the different disciplines and classes, and you learn math and social sciences in the pursuit of some project that you're interested in. And so I think it gets a little bit to Mimi's point about privilege. I think that if you have the resources and the quality of teachers to be able to think, okay, maybe I should teach them algebra now. Here's an opportunity to teach, and you eventually put all of the bricks together, but through a interest-driven method. I think that can work. I don't think you need to force everybody to go through boring textbooks. But on the other hand, I think if you're trying to scale with hundreds of students with a very small number of teachers, it's harder to be personalized. But I think it's solvable, because I think the thing is, in Finland, very talented people want to become teachers and they're well paid. And so I think a lot of it is about, can we increase, I was just in Detroit, we spend more money in Detroit on prisons than on schools, right? So I think just diverting resources might be one way to fix some of these things.
Yeah, and I think the learning sciences, to Mitch's point, has proven time and time again that this is how young people learn best. If they don't find meaning and purpose, they don't remember what they learn in school anyway. So the question of whether we need schooling is a different question, I think, from whether to how that schooling happens. And I think schooling, or public education, in which I consider museums and libraries to be as much a part of public education as schools, I think is absolutely critically important for, equity and access to learning. But how the learning happens is something that I think we can do a better job on.
It's coincident that I met my high school teacher of art last night and had a dinner. He's one of my mentor. And he, so when I was a high school student, I just escaped from the class. I didn't want to be there, so just I escaped from there and went to his art room, and he didn't say any negative thing to me. Just, okay, you can stay here, and you can, oh, this is a book, this is a CD that I'm listening now, and I was so taught by him a lot about what's the art, what's the and I learned the value that there is multiple perspective, like he thinks this is important, the other teacher thinks this is important, and both are important, right? So I was saved by him, and it's a part of unschooling maybe, but so I think the most important thing is the option that the spaces that the kids can have. Traditional school is also important, but the other options that if we can have, that would be great for the kids. Actually. Yeah.
And I think one of the important aspects, not only about unschooling, but about our interaction with children in general, is that I think we need to learn to trust children more. Because there is, unschooling has been around for quite a while, and there is now actually a grown-up generation of unschoolers. And so there were some studies made on how these grown-up unschoolers did in society, and it shows that even though they have never been, forced to learn even the basic skills of society, everybody has somehow managed to figure out how to read and write, to have basic math skills, and then actually over 80% of grown-up unschoolers went into higher education, and almost everybody got into university of their first choice. And that is because they knew exactly what they want to go for and how to achieve that goal, I believe. So the thing is, what this might show is that children are very aware of what the culture is funded upon. and what kind of basic expertise there is that needs to be acquired. But then it's really up to the child. The child knows best for him or herself of how they want to acquire those skills.
I think we're out of time, so thank you very much to the speakers on the panel for a great discussion. どうもありがとう。
Thank you.
ありがとうございました。登壇者の皆様に
Thank you very much. Please give the speakers a big round of applause. Thank you very much.